Hey, this is Zircon, and in this video I'm going to do something a little bit different. I want to talk about 4 things that I wish I knew when I started making music back in 2003. I think if you are closer to the start of your music production journey, or it's something that you want to get into, you'll find this pretty interesting, so stay tuned. So the first piece of advice I have actually extends beyond music production, and that is to not create only when you're inspired. And that's something that I didn't fully understand for many years. Creating art is a fun process. We all remember as a kid just drawing on paper or playing an instrument and making noise for the first time. Those things are fun. They're not work. But what I realized as I wanted to develop my career as an artist and eventually pay my bills with it, support a family, I realized that I couldn't just make music when the fun part of my brain was turned on. Sometimes when you're making music, you are sitting in front of a DAW and you're stuck and you don't have any ideas. Or other times, maybe you have this awesome 16-bar loop and you just don't know what to do next. And so you hit play, you loop it for a little while, and then you go watch YouTube or play video games or whatever. That is totally natural, very, very common, but it's also not what I would consider a healthy habit. You need to develop both the inner discipline to work even when you're not motivated on creating art, but you also want to develop techniques that you can use to get past the lack of inspiration writer's block. The discipline part of it is basically being able to sit down and say, I'm going to work on this for half an hour. I'm gonna turn off my phone, I'm going to disable notifications, and even if I don't get anywhere, I'm just gonna focus for 30 minutes. And that can be hard in this day and age, but being able to do that, to set aside the time and say, no matter how I feel, I'm gonna do it anyway, that goes a long way. The technique side of things means if you're approaching music in a certain way, like let's say you're used to writing down a melody when you hear it in your head, and then if you can't think of anything, you don't know what to do, and so you don't do anything at all. Well, what you might look into is ways of getting inspired for melodies, like maybe using some kind of generative MIDI sequencer, or learning how to improvise and playing over a chord progression, or using some other kind of technique altogether. There's this amazing talk by the composer Mick Gordon, who worked on the Doom soundtracks and a lot of amazing other works. And he said something to the effect of, change the process, change the result. And that really resonated with me. If you are not inspired and the method you're using is not getting you anywhere, if you're sitting down for an hour every day and you're just not making forward progress, try to adopt a different way of working and see how far that gets you. The second thing I wish I knew when I was just getting started, not to buy something just because it looks cool or it sounds cool. Years ago, I used to have boxes and boxes of software, back when software came in boxes, lining my little studio desk with all kinds of sample libraries and synth plugins and effects and things like that. I also bought a lot of hardware, analog synths, high-end digital synthesizers, workstations. Some of that stuff I bought because I heard that they were really good, really professional tools, or I heard some demos that sounded great, or any number of other reasons. But what I didn't think about is how it would fit my workflow. Workflow is the most important thing. I talked about this a little bit in my Eurorack modular video, but for me, hardware synths just never quite clicked because it never fit my workflow, no matter how good they sounded. So it's just a waste of money for me. There are also some kinds of sample libraries, like the Native Instruments Session Guitarist, that whole series of libraries, that it just doesn't click with me. And it doesn't matter how good they sound and how good the demos are and how much other people like them. Buying them doesn't do me any good. You have to consider that you have a limited number of hours in every day. Everybody has the same number of hours. So while I think that anybody can learn to use just about any tool, you have to think of the practical aspect of it. Do you really have the time, the resources to make that tool work in your workflow? If not, then as painful as it may be, pass it by, even if it's something that's recommended by somebody like me on this very channel. The third thing I wish I knew, when you create an interesting sound, whether it is a synth patch or a drum loop or a texture or effect or something like that, don't just let it sit there and save it into a project and forget about it. When you create interesting sounds, bounce them so that you can use them somewhere else. This sounds so obvious, but it's something that I overlooked for many years. I had hundreds and hundreds of projects sitting around, unfinished songs for one reason or another. There were interesting melodies that I made, sequences, drops, risers, kicks, snares. None of that stuff was getting used, even though I put the time into making it. A technique that I use when it comes to using the modular synth is just hitting record so that while I'm engaged in the sound design process and noodling around, I'm capturing everything that I'm doing. And some DAWs have that capability when it comes to MIDI as well. So while you're playing, even if the track isn't armed for recording, you can actually go back and dump the last 10, 15, 20 minutes of recording to capture an idea that you might have thought was just temporary. There's something really satisfying about pulling a sound or an idea that you made for a project that didn't go anywhere and then fitting it in like a missing piece into a new project. So don't just save the ideas, but actually bounce them, render them, put them in a folder somewhere that's easily accessible so you can use them for your future projects. And the fourth and final thing that I wish I knew when I was getting started would be to check out modular synthesis. I know I've been talking about this a lot over the last month or so, but it can't be overstated. It is just so much fun. Now, did I have the financial means to get into it early on in my career or before I had made any money from music? Of course not. So I'm not suggesting to myself or to anyone else to go out and buy a whole bunch of modules because it can get pretty expensive. But what I could have done and what anybody can do is check out the free VCV Rack. Using VCV Rack, you can experience so much of the joy and the creativity of modular synthesis right in the DAW. You can get used to the concepts and what it's like to create patches and the idea of using VCAs and multipliers and mixers and all that good stuff. I've only been using a modular for the last year or so, but I can only imagine how much more skilled I would have been if I had started out 5 or 10 years ago with something like VCV Rack and then started assembling a physical synth when I was ready. There are all sorts of things you can do, whether it's processing a guitar or vocals or just having like a little sequence generator with a very limited number of modules and relatively simple patches. So those are the 4 things that I wish I knew a long time ago. I'm glad I know them now, and I hope that at least one of them will have resonated with you a little bit and that you can start applying to your own musical journey. I want to know what sort of things do you wish you knew starting out? Could be something with gear or composition or theory or business or anything else. I want to know. Leave a comment. Anyway, this has been Zircon, and I will see you in the next one.